Good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to FCI Live. My name is JQ Hanna, and I am the Assistant Director of Food Co-op Initiative. Thank you so much for coming and being part of our fall series. We run this series twice a year, and you are here for our session, You Can't Give People a Co-op. Super excited about this session. Malik Yakini is with Detroit People's Food Co-op, also with the Detroit Black People's Food Security Network. He'll correct me if I got the name wrong. They just made a little shift in it, so I might have got it wrong. He is the co-executive director of that organization as well. Phenomenal leader in the food co-op movement, who is here to share with us today about some of his learnings and wisdom from doing food co-op development. And I love where this quote comes from. You can't give people a food co-op is a quote, but I'm going to let Malik explain it to you. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Malik.
Thank you very much, JQ, and it's a pleasure to have a little time to share part of our journey of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. We're nearing the finish line, which actually is another starting line, and so I'm going to try to share a bit with you about the journey that we've been on. I want to give a shout out. I see Don Moffitt, and I want to give a shout out to Don and just say that he's been an essential person in this journey. He, as many other people I met at the Up and Coming conference, and I'll mention that in my presentation, but that was a turning point, I think, in the development of our co-op, really being in contact with some of the people who I consider to be experts in the food co-op field. And certainly Don Moffitt is one of those. So he has been a tremendous asset in terms of our pro forma. And if the pro forma ain't right, ain't nothing right. I'll say that. So he's been essential. So I want to encourage you, if you are not already working with Don, if you haven't met him, to do that. And greetings to everyone else who is on the call. There may be some other folks I know. I don't see everybody's face right now, but greetings to folks I know and I don't know. So I want to start by giving praise and to the creator, however you might acknowledge or recognize the force that creates order in the universe and allows us to wake up and take a breath each morning. I want to always put that in front of me, and that is the platform that I stand on. At the root, the work I'm doing is really a spiritual work. And so I always put the creator first, and secondly, my ancestors, those who are in my own personal bloodline and those that African-American people share collectively. I'll start by just giving you a bit about myself, because that might be helpful in understanding how the work of our organization is proceeding. And I'll start by saying that I'm 66 years old. And I'm telling you that because it helps you to position me within a particular era of time. And so I was born in 1956, came of age in the late 1960s, and all of those who have even done a perfunctory study of US history or world history know that the 1960s was both a very turbulent period, but it was also a period pregnant with change. And so as a very young person, I became an activist, primarily in the Black liberation movement, because I grew up and continue to live in a overwhelmingly predominantly Black community. And so my work has been in that community primarily. So at the age of 13, when I was in the 8th grade, I had teachers who played Malcolm X records for us and had us reading all kinds of literature, which gave us a better understanding of the position of Black people in America, of how systemic racism works, of issues like culture and politics. And so as a very young person, I was exploring these complex social issues. And so I'm very grateful to have grown up during that time period. Again, I want to share that time period I grew up in because that continues to define many of the ideas that came out of that time period, continues to define the work that I'm involved in now. I want to bring greetings from the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. You almost got it right, JQ. And she's absolutely correct that we are changing our name. In fact, we're waiting on the results of an election by our membership. They have to ratify the change, but we will soon be the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty network because we realized several years ago that really the work that we're doing is more food sovereignty work than it is food security work. At its root, food security means that people aren't hungry, that people have enough calories each day. And while that is a noble goal, in fact, I would say that it's obscene that anyone in a country as rich as America would be hungry. But for me, food security is just a minimal goal. We are much more concerned about communities having control over the systems that provide our food. And because we live in a society that is still permeated on every level by the system of white supremacy, and there continues to be inequity in every area of society, with people who are defined as white having more access to resources and power, because that's the reality of the situation we find ourselves in. Our work is focused on building power for Black people so that we can, one, define what our own interests are, and two, advance those interests. Now, that's not to say that we're opposed to anybody else. We work with any human beings who are trying to make the planet a better place, but we have absolutely no apology about being focused on uplifting the Black community. Now, we realize that we don't live in a bubble, and that, for example, what affects America in general affects Black people. And we also know that what affects the world affects America. So we don't proceed as if we live in a bubble and that what happens outside the Black community doesn't impact us. We understand that all those things are interrelated. And so as we're developing our community, we try to do it with a lens that is conscious of our relationship to the rest of humanity. Being unapologetically pro-Black community does not mean that we are against any other group. In fact, I'll extend it and say that we are for the upliftment and liberation of humanity, and that we think the best contribution that we can make to the liberation of humanity is by uplifting those people that we are in community with, those people that we live closest to. So having said all that, I want to get into this PowerPoint, which is the tofu of my presentation. I'm trying not to use carnivorous references, but I want to get into the kind of gist of it, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of that. So hopefully all will go well with my screen sharing. Can you see my screen? Throw your thumbs up or something if you can see it. Okay, great. Great, great, great. So here we go.
Recording in progress.
Oh, you know, it might be good if we start from the beginning of the presentation and not from the end. Bam, there we go. So this quote, "You can't give people a co-op," is a quote from Bill Gessner. And many of you knew Bill Gessner. He is now in the realm of the ancestors. But he was a consultant for, at the time, what was CDS Consulting Co-op, which is now Colluminate. And he's another person that I met at Up and Coming. And so again, I'll continue to say this, that for us, Up and Coming, attending Up and Coming was really a turning point, and helped us to kind of refine our work and helped us to reprioritize, because I think we were putting too much energy in some areas that weren't the key and essential areas. So we met Bill Gessner at Up and Coming also, and he initially started working with us with our pro forma, and then after he passed, Don Moffitt took over that work. But in the time that he spent with us, he came to Detroit and spent a few days with us and conducted some sessions. And one of the things that he said, one of the many things that he said that was valuable, was you can't give people a co-op. And what he meant by that is that people in community have to want a co-op to happen. This is not a charity type of operation where we are coming to save somebody. We're not coming to save our community. We are mobilizing our community members to work together collectively to uplift ourselves. And so you can't impose that on people. You really have to do the slow work in community engagement and community organizing to, one, to make sure that people understand what co-ops are, and I'll talk a bit more about some of the challenges related to that. But two, that they see co-ops as being a viable way to create a more equitable economy. And so you have to move, sometimes people use the term at the speed of trust. You have to build this critical mass because a co-op is not run by any 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people, but you really need hundreds of people working in concert with each other to make a project like this successful. So again, you can't give people a co-op. You can educate people, you can motivate people, you can provide the vehicle for people to become involved, but ultimately people have to exhibit what we call self-determination. This is something that people have to want and have to work collectively to bring into being. So I want to tell you a bit about the 12-year journey of the Detroit People's Food Co-op that has gotten us to where we are today. So Detroit is often in the national news, many times for the wrong stuff. And in the last few years, there's been a lot of conversation about Detroit coming back. Many people know that Detroit had the largest municipal bankruptcy in US history. Many of us in Detroit feel like it was a contrived bankruptcy, basically to get banks paid. And it also happened in conjunction with the imposition of an emergency manager on the city of Detroit by the governor, who the emergency manager is really who led the city into the bankruptcy. And so there's quite a bit of sentiment in Detroit, again, that it was a contrived bankruptcy in order really to lessen the agency of the people of Detroit and really put the control of the city of Detroit in the hands of people on a statewide level. There could be a lot said about that, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving, but I would invite you to do your own research about emergency managers in the state of Michigan and how that strategy has been used to undermine self-determination and agency in predominantly Black communities throughout the state. So in Detroit currently, as part of the so-called comeback, we see downtown bustling with new Detroiters and visitors. In fact, sometimes I go into downtown Detroit and I think I look around, I say, wow, am I in Sweden or where am I? Because it's so much different than the Detroit that I grew up in. Also, the area that has been now relabeled Midtown, and kind of relabeling neighborhoods is one of the characteristics of gentrification, erasing the historical memory. And so the area that was formerly called Cass Corridor in Detroit is now called Midtown. And downtown and Midtown are where we see tremendous amounts of capital being poured into developing new restaurants, new businesses, so on and so forth. So we see lots of development in those two areas of the city, but the majority of the people in the city are still suffering. Detroit always has a very high poverty rate. It's something like 39%. Right now, the population lives below the federal poverty level. And these statistics might be a bit old. I don't know today if this is accurate, but it's somewhere in that range. About 40% of Detroiters don't own an automobile, which is significant because Detroit, as you know, is often called the Motor City and was the powerhouse of the automobile industry for the first half of the 20th century. And so because of that, because of the desire to sell cars, public transportation was intentionally underdeveloped in Detroit. We don't have a subway like they do in Atlanta. We don't have a L system like they have in Chicago. We don't have rapid transportation like they do in Toronto, or subways like they do in New York. We have a bus system which is often late, dirty, and unsafe. Many neighborhoods in Detroit do not have a full service grocery store. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, Mari Gallagher came to Detroit and did a research study called Examining the Impact of Food Deserts on Public Health in Detroit. And that study, along with other studies, previous studies she did in Chicago, popularized the use of that term food desert. And while I don't use that term food desert anymore, and most conscious Black food activists do not use that term anymore because of it's deficient in many ways, but the main way it's deficient is it doesn't really point out the intentionality of the disparities that we see in the food system. When we think of a desert, most people think it's a naturally occurring ecosystem And there's nothing natural about the great disparities that we see in wealth, power, and access to food in the United States. It is intentional. And so many of us have begun using the term food apartheid to lift up the intentionality of the great disparities that we see. In Detroit, which is, I sometimes say, the blackest city in North America, and what I mean by that is that we have a larger percentage of the entire population that is Black than any other city in the United States. I kind of jokingly tease my brothers and sisters in Brooklyn and needle them back and forth because the reality is Brooklyn has more Black people than Detroit, but as a percent of the total population, Detroit has a higher percentage than Brooklyn. So even though we are the blackest city in North America, and the city has a population of approximately 645,000 people, about 80% of whom are African American, there are currently no Black-owned grocery stores in the city of Detroit. On the retail food level in Detroit, as in many areas of the economy, we see wealth being extracted from the Black community and almost in a colonial-like fashion, where these more powerful forces come in, set up businesses and extract tremendous amounts of wealth from the Black community. Again, I like to say more about that, but for brevity, I'm not going to get into it. But I will just say this, that it's worth your research if you haven't done it, to look at how the federal government, through the development of the federal highway system in the 1950s and the intentional development of subdivisions around the city, around or outside of cities, helped to foster the development of suburban subdivisions and the white flight that occurred in the late 50s and early 1960s and 70s that resulted in the kind of demographics that we see in places like Detroit, and also resulted in the destruction of Black business districts throughout the country. Typically, highways would come through areas that had the lower property values, and not surprisingly, the areas that had lower property values were usually predominantly Black. And so in Detroit, we had an area called Black Bottom, and a street in particular called Hastings Street, which was a booming business district that was destroyed when I-75 came through. The same thing happened in Atlanta. The same thing happened in many other cities throughout the United States. So now we find Black people in a situation where we are easy prey for those who would come in and extract wealth from our communities. And that's exactly what's happening in Detroit and most Black communities throughout the United States. The organization that I lead is the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. We started in 2006, and some of our early goals were establishing fair and just policy, supporting urban ag, and establishing a food co-op. So from the very beginning, that was on our radar to make happen. And I'll just go through this quickly. These are some of the things that we've done. We wrote the City of Detroit's food security policy, which we have passed by the City Council in 2008. And we stewarded the creation of the Detroit Food Policy Council, which I chaired for its first 2 years, but it now stands on its own 2 feet. It's totally independent of our organization. We also run the largest farm in the city of Detroit, and largest in the sense that we have the largest contiguous piece of land. There's another farm in Detroit called Pingree Farms that is spread out throughout a neighborhood on various pieces of land, but it's not one piece. So they actually have a total land which is larger than ours, but as far as one farm or one piece, we currently have the largest farm in the city of Detroit. And we've been doing that at the current location since 2008. We grow more than 3 dozen different fruits, vegetables, and herbs that we've been selling primarily at farmers markets and a farm stand at the farm, but we will begin selling at the Detroit People's Food Co-op when it opens. We also run a youth development program called the Food Warriors, which is designed to foster within young people an understanding of their responsibility to their community in general, but in particular to shaping a food system within their community that provides high quality, nutrient dense food in a way that also promotes justice and equity. The Food Warriors program functions at 3 sites in Detroit, and we teach young people how to build and maintain raised bed gardens and all kinds of other concepts. We also typically in non-pandemic times do lecture series because we understand that our struggle is twofold. One, we do want to bring high quality, nutrient dense, locally grown produce to our community. But at the same time, we understand that people have grown up for the last 2-3 generations in a culture which in which fast food is dominant. Many people, in fact, typically in communities, we've lost much of our food culture and much of our food knowledge. And so, I've had situations where I gave beets to people, fresh beets out of the ground. They looked at them and said, "What am I supposed to do with this?" Right? Because they've just never prepared that before. And, so many people are used to preparing food-like substances from bags and styrofoam containers and cans. And so we have to raise public awareness at the same time that we're making this food available. Our former board president, Dr. Monica White, who is the author of the book Freedom Farmers, describes DBCFSN as, quote, a group that responds to the issue of the delivery of human rights by enacting an agentic perspective. My sister is an academic, and so she talks in academic speak. I don't speak like that exactly, but what she's saying is that rather than us taking an approach that we are waiting for the government to come in and correct our problems, or waiting for corporations to come in and correct our problems, we exhibit self-determination. We take agency over our own lives, and we see the right to high quality, nutrient-dense food as a human right. Just a result of being a human being on the earth, we have the right to that. So we are guided by an analysis of the system of white supremacy and capitalism. And again, I don't want to go into a lot about those systems right now, because that would take the whole hour. But I'm sure these are hopefully not new concepts to folks who are on this webinar. But we find that those systems interact. In fact, sometimes I call them like evil twin sisters. And when they interact, they invisibilize the history of people who've been marginalized and oppressed, and it views us simply as a source of cheap labor and as consumers. And so clearly we're trying to flip that paradigm so that we are producers, so that the value of our own labor is not extracted for the benefit of others, but it is circulated within our communities. Both our labor and profits are circulated in our community in order to uplift that community. Racism is as American as apple pie. It permeates every institution in American society. This is the University of Michigan. It could well be Harvard. It could be University of California. It could be any other white university in the United States. And unfortunately, it could also be many HBCUs that many times function as white universities in blackface. There's still tremendous economic disparity between blacks and whites in this country. And as we speak today, the average white family has something like 14 times the wealth of the average black family. To combat this historical inequity in American society, one of the things that black folks have done coming right out of chattel slavery has been to adopt co-ops. And the scholar, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, around the turn of the previous century, did great research documenting hundreds of Black-owned co-ops throughout the country. And then Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimhart continued his research with her must-read book, Collective Courage. If you haven't read that, you must read this book to understand how Black folks have utilized co-ops historically to galvanize our collective power and wealth in the face of a system which is hell-bent on keeping us out of the mainstream economy. And this is, again, Dr. Du Bois did this research in 1907 and documented 154 African-American owned co-ops. And I said hundreds earlier, let me correct that and say it was 154. Currently in the food co-op landscape, most co-ops are predominantly white. And I'm happy to say that over the last several years, there's a shifting that's taking place among folks in the co-op community. We've seen that both at the Up and Coming Conference. We see it with FCI. We see it with National Cooperative Grocers. I think there's a shift that's happening generally as more Black folks are stepping into the space and demanding really that the space shift in order to meet the realities of the communities that we're living in. So still predominantly though, the co-ops exist in affluent, mostly white communities. This is the Ann Arbor People's Food Co-op in the photo there, and no shade on Ann Arbor People's Food Co-op. In fact, I want to big them up and say they've been very helpful to Detroit People's Food Co-op and have given financial donations and had us speak at their board meetings and are being tremendously helpful. As are most of the other co-ops in the state. Let me say that also. Most of the other food co-ops in the state have collectively put a fund together and donated money to the Detroit People's Food Co-op. So P6ing is a real thing, cooperation among co-ops. So let me tell you a bit about the journey we've been on for the last 12 years. From 2009 to 2017, we operated a buying club, which was a precursor to the brick and mortar building that we're building now. The photo on the left is Brother Mumbera, who headed for several years our buying club, and the photo on the I don't know if I said left or right. The photo of the woman is Akila Mohammed, who is a member of the buying club. And so basically the way the buying club worked is we would order food in bulk from UNFI, United Natural Foods, which by the way has almost taken over the distribution of so-called health foods. Capitalism is still at play. Don't think because we're in the organic food and natural food space that we're in some capitalism safe free zone, because capitalism still dominates in that space. So they've eaten up most of the smaller players and really dominate the space now. We had a hard time even getting a relationship with them. I don't have time to go into that. We had to send a lawyer send a letter threatening legal action before they would even service us. That's a whole nother story for another day. But we operated this co-op where we would buy in bulk, then we would divide people's orders up and they would come pick them up, as you see Sister Keela doing here. We ultimately stopped in 2017 because of some problems with UNFI. Again, another conversation for another day. I just don't want to belabor that point with the limited time I have today. In 2010, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network did a feasibility study with some funding that we got from the Wallace Center. We surveyed more than 300 people at grocery stores and farmers markets. We did 12 focus groups. And the information we got back was that there was sufficient support in Detroit for the creation of a food co-op. We then went about learning best practices from other co-ops, and we visited several in the state of Michigan, including the Kalamazoo People's Food Co-op, the East Lansing Food Co-op, which is now closed. But interestingly, the general manager of the East Lansing Food Co-op at the time that I visited and got great information from, in fact, David Fike was the general manager at the time, is now a member of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. He's now moved to Detroit, but he's also the person who put us in touch with the Food Co-op Initiative. David Fike in turn put us in touch with the Ypsilanti Food Co-op, and they've been very helpful. And so we've had a chance to sit down with Corrine, the general manager, on multiple occasions and learn best practices, the same with the Ann Arbor People's Food Co-op. The Kalamazoo People's Food Co-op in particular, though, had a tremendous influence on our concept of what this complex that we wanted to develop could become. And the reason they had so much influence was because not only was it a retail grocery store, but they had a community space and they had commercial kitchens attached to it. And we wanted all of those things to be part of this project that we were developing. We also visited co-ops throughout the country, including the Green Star Market in Ithaca, which has been functioning for more than 30 years, and talked to the board president. In fact, interviewed him on video so that we could share it with the rest of our team. And we visited the notorious Park Slope Co-op in Brooklyn, which I'm told is the largest co-op in the country with more than 17,000 members. The times I've visited Park Slope Co-op, I couldn't even go in the co-op unless I was with a member owner. And then even with a member owner and having my name tag on that I got from the customer service office, I still couldn't purchase anything. And so we've learned, and again, this is not shade on Park Slope Co-op, but it's just to say that that model we didn't think would work well in Detroit. That kind of exclusive model, might work in Park Slope, Brooklyn for some folks, but it doesn't work for us in Detroit. So we've learned, from other co-ops, both what to do and what not to do. So we initially got $150,000 from the Kellogg Foundation and some pre-development funding for our project. Then we got another $30,000 from the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, $20,000 from the Fair Food Network, and our organization combined contributed our staff time and office support. In 2013, we realized that we needed to create an advisory board. We need to broaden and this is part of going back to the theme, you can't give people a food co-op we understood that we had to broaden kind of this body that was making decisions. And so we created a community advisory board that had about a dozen people on it, I think. I'm trying to go back in my memory, thanks. Who were allies, comrades working within the food sphere in the city of Detroit, and they helped us to do a lot of the thinking. They were kind of the de facto board, in fact, for the co-op until we established the board and became incorporated. So we also began researching which neighborhoods we wanted to locate the co-op in, and we decided upon the north end of Detroit, a neighborhood called the North End, both because of its demographics and its accessibility from various parts of the city. In terms of the demographics, the North End is a predominantly low and moderate income community. And so we were looking for a community that has an actual need. There's another community in Detroit called Redford that was actually courting us and told us they had a building that they could give to us or make use of for next to nothing. And they really wanted the co-op to locate there, and we probably could have located there and been very successful. But the problem is it's a fairly affluent community, and it doesn't really meet the need that we were trying to meet. But there's a delicate balance that has to be met because, again, a co-op, we're still functioning within a capitalist economy. And the reality is that a co-op is still a business. What's up, Lene Gilbert Williams? This is our board president. Throw your hands up so everybody can see you. In fact, can you? No, you can't open your mic. But anyway, that's Lene, she's our board president. So the demographics. So it's it's still a business. And so if you operate where for too long, where your expenses exceed your revenues, you're going to go out of business, whether you're a co-op or not. And so, we have to be attentive to the economic dynamics. And so while our mission is to serve predominantly low and moderate income folks who need access, who have limited access now and need additional access, the reality is also you have to attract some people who have more affluence and more income in order to kind of balance things out. And so the best food related businesses that are based in justice do well when you find an area to locate where you have kind of that mix of folks who are low and moderate income along with some other folks who are affluent so that you can keep the business afloat. And so the North End provided that mix that we were looking for. After looking at all of the existing buildings in the North End, we realized that we were going to have to build a building from scratch, from the ground up, which is crazy. Let me tell you that. If you don't have to do that, don't do it. I mean, there's some advantages, if you're like really into control like we are, it might make sense to have the building and own the land and all those kind of things. But if you want to relieve yourselves of major headaches, you might want to find a place just to lease, at least initially, and your life will be a lot easier, I assure you. But we decided to go the route of building a new building. We retained a project manager because, of course, we had no experience in development, and we needed folks who were experienced in that field. So we determined after much discussion that we wanted to be on Detroit's main street, not on the back street somewhere where city officials were trying to encourage us to locate and telling us properties. No, we want to be right in the mix. We want to be in your face, in the face of gentrifying Detroit, saying here's the Detroit People's Food Co-op. Because really what we're doing is challenging politically the existing paradigm in the city of Detroit. So the location even is part of that. But there's also a practical element of the location because there are gazillions of people who travel that street every day, mostly white people who live in the suburbs north of Detroit, who work inside of the city of Detroit. And so if you stand on the west side of this street of Woodward Avenue at about 8 o'clock in the morning, you'll see like 10 gazillion white people going from the suburbs to downtown. And if you stand on the east side of the street at 5 o'clock, you'll see those same 10 gazillion white people leaving the city, going to the suburbs. And so as those 10 gazillion white people are leaving, we want them to be able to be good allies and make a right turn into our parking lot and to be able to buy, wine, whatever for dinner that they might want to take with them. And so our strategy, our audience, our customer base is first the people in that neighborhood within a mile radius of the store. Secondly is Detroiters in general. And I forgot to mention this when I talked about the North End location. This is also very centrally located and it's accessible by major freeways. And so our secondary customer base is Detroiters in general. And then our third customer base would be the folks living in the suburbs, but using Woodward Avenue each day as their thoroughfare to get home. And so we are attempting to build an audience and a customer base in all three of those areas. So you can imagine that in a gentrifying Detroit, there's tremendous competition for parcels, especially on Woodward Avenue. I'm not going to go through the whole journey. I'll just say that we made several bids on parcels, and it was a very difficult process to obtain land. In 2014, we did an initial market research study, which we've done 2 other market research studies since then. Of course, once something is a couple years old, it's antiquated, it's no longer valid. And so that was part of the problem with this one. But that was the first market research study. We've also had help from Emerson Hunger Fellows, and these are a couple of the Hunger Fellows who helped to put together some of the community engagement sessions that we've had, and we've done more than 40 community engagement sessions since we opened up for membership in 2014. 2014, we became so-called official. We actually had a name then and began using the term Detroit People's Food Co-op. We became incorporated and had bylaws. As I mentioned, we've done more than 40 community engagement sessions. These are some pictures. And again, going back to the theme, you can't give people a co-op. You can bring the concept to people and you can try to get buy-in. And you can see these are all efforts where we had, significant numbers of people to come out and engage with us. And many of those people have become member owners of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. This is Mama Hanifa, my comrade and colleague, who is DBCFSN's Education and Outreach Director. This is her doing an outreach opportunity for the co-op. Up and coming. So I mentioned that up and coming was a game-changing event for us. And the main way it was game-changing is that we have been putting way, way, way too much energy into the development side of our project, way too much energy into the real estate, into the financing, and not enough energy into the people. The co-op is essentially the people. And one of the side effects of that imbalance of energy, or that allocation of energy, was that we didn't have a big enough core group to hold the work. And so building that core group first so that you have a collective that can shoulder the work is extremely important. And so that's one of the most important lessons that we learned from attending Up and Coming for the first time 8 or 9 years ago. Again, it was a game changer for us and put us in touch with several people who have been key people in helping us develop a sound plan for the development of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. So the name of the building that we're building that the Detroit People's Food Co-op will be located in is the Detroit Food Commons. And this is actually an earlier rendition. I meant to take this out of the presentation, but I'll show you the current architectural rendering before the presentation is over. So I mentioned that obtaining the land in a highly gentrifying environment was very difficult. The city council president at the time, unbeknownst to me, had heard me talking about the co-op and went to the director of the City of Detroit's Housing and Revitalization Department and told him, I want you to work with them to make this project work. And so after meeting with them, they told us they would make certain land available, certain city land available. And while we've been having problems with private owners, the city did in fact make land available that ultimately we purchased. That is the site of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. We purchased, I think, 11 parcels, one large parcel that the building is being built on, and then 10 that will house the parking lot. DeAndre Levy was a football player with the Detroit Lions. He now pretty much detests football because of rape culture and other manifestations of toxic masculinity within the NFL. But he gave a sizable donation. He doesn't want me to say the amount, but he gave a sizable donation that was adequate for us to purchase the land. And I can tell you this, he didn't want any credit for it. He didn't want a picture taken, none of that. And it really changed my view because I've been very hard on athletes and musicians and saying, oh, they need to help the Black community. They ain't doing nothing. The reality is we don't really know who's doing what. Just like after Prince died, we find out he's undercover giving money to all kinds of Black organizations. So we just need to be careful with our condemnation of folks when we really don't know what people are doing. And he really is an example of that. we got site control of the property in, I think, 2017. And everything you see outlined in blue is the property that we've been able to obtain for this project. There is one section that we ended up not getting. You can see a white building, and then behind the white building, that little blue section, we did not get, but everything on the kind of upper half of that picture in blue, we did get. The part that we didn't get, we were trying to use as an entrance for trucks, but we weren't able to obtain that property, so we had to go to a plan B. So we, as I said, we are unapologetically dedicated to the upliftment and empowerment of Black people. And so we intentionally try to spend our money with Black folks whenever possible. And so we did hire an African-American architect who we thought would be a good fit, but after working with him for several months and trying to convey to him the kind of innovative design we wanted, we were not satisfied. This was the design he came up with, which to us looked more like some kind of hospital or institution, or didn't really have the flair we were looking for. So we ended up putting together a new team of architects. And I want to first say that the person on the left side is Julie McBride, who was our project manager, who unfortunately passed in early 2020, not of COVID, but passed of some other causes. She had some health problems, but she was essential in getting us to the finish line. And next to her is Russell Baltimore, who was the design architect, the one who kind of designed the aesthetic of the building. Then next to him are two architects from Sims Design Group, including Wesley Sims, who's standing next to me, who's the owner. They're the architects of record, the ones who work with the contractors and pull the city permits and make sure that the building is being built to specifications. This is just in kind of a drawing of the site plan. We have a second floor in the building, so the Detroit People's Food Co-op will lease and be the tenant on the first floor of the building. On the second floor, we'll have a 3,000 square foot community meeting space / banquet hall, 4 shared use kitchens, and we're moving the offices of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network there. We had to spec out for all the kitchens, and I know you can't read this, don't try to see it, it's too small, but we had to spec out all the equipment for all 4 kitchens, and so that's what you see there, where there's numbers, and we can identify what each piece of equipment is that will be in those kitchens. We hired an initial architect, a Black architect, but they lost their bonding, and so we had to go through another search to find another architect, and we ended up hiring the L.S. Brinker Company, which is headed by Larry Brinker. The city said in order for us to obtain this land that it had to be a mixed-use development. Our initial concept was that it would only be a commercial space, but they wanted housing as part of it. We pushed back heavily against housing being on top of the building, and finally we arrived in agreement with the city where housing being built near the co-op can count as part of that project. So we partnered with Develop Detroit, a nonprofit housing developer who has already developed several housing units in the area and will be developing some more units directly across the street from the co-op. We also partnered with Develop Detroit because we needed a financial guarantor for the debt financing, and they have deeper pockets, so they're serving as that. And they also, after Julie McBride passed, end up serving as project manager on the project. In 2017, I mentioned that we had kind of put way too much energy into the development side. In 2017, we started refocusing on the co-op proper. And at that time, Dr. Cool Woolbright was the board president and kind of led that refocusing. This is Bill Gessner on the left, who I talked about earlier. The quote for this session comes from Bill Gessner. And then next to him is Ujamaa Booz, who was the assistant team leader at the Detroit Whole Foods store and served as a consultant for us and is still a candidate as general manager of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. In December 2018, we had another market research study done by Keith Wicks and Associates, which conservatively estimates that we'll do $110,000 in weekly sales. We have contracted with 7 Roots consultants to do the interior design of the store. This is a rough sketch by Nicole Klimek. This is a more developed layout of the inside of the store by Nicole and 7 Roots. 2017, again, the co-op itself started to really get its legs and begin taking over some of the functions that previously the nonprofit I lead that started the co-op, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, had headed. Now the co-op is heading its own membership processing, responding to inquiries, doing notices for meetings, and all the business that any organization will have to conduct. They're now able to conduct that on their own. They do have an office in the office of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. In 2017, we resumed monthly meetings. In fact, David Fike appears on the far left-hand side, the white guy with glasses on, he's the guy who was general manager of the East Lansing Food Co-op at one point. In September of 2018, we had a fall monthly owner meeting, full house for that. These are some of the folks who helped to put that on, some of the member owners. And now we are in the home stretch. So on April 23rd of this year, we had a groundbreaking. And in the photo that you see, those are members of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, helping to turn over that soil. And the one with the baby is our board president. That's Dr. Shakira Tyler. It was a tremendous event. In fact, folks from the city who go to groundbreakings all the time said they have never seen the level of community support that turned out for our groundbreaking. We had hundreds of people there. The photo I'm standing in is with Dr. Jasmine Jackson, who is the co-executive director of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, that has been a key force in organizing Black co-op developers throughout the country. I have on a hard hat that was given to me that day that has logos of many of the co-ops that are in the cohort that the National Black Food and Justice Alliance convenes. And you might know many of those co-ops because they are very much involved in the peer calls with FCI also. So that was kind of a gift that we got that day. And then the bottom picture is Sister Angela Lugo Thomas, who is a board member of the Detroit People's Food Co-op, sporting the t-shirts that we debuted that day at the groundbreaking. So I want to give you an update on construction. Hopefully this video will play. This was shot about 2 weeks ago.
Hello, my name is Brianna Campbell. I am the project engineer here on the Detroit Food Commons project. Go ahead, pan around. Okay. So currently we just finished up our masonry, which means we have the envelope complete, the outside. So after this, maybe next week after next, we'll have steel coming in, and then you will really start to see the body of the store come. Right? You can probably hear that noise in the background. That's one of the masons over there finishing up now. This project is set to be complete by the middle of next year. And I am just really excited for what is in store for you guys. Make sure you come out, support, and get a share.
That's right, get a share. We are still learning. And so these are photos taken last week when some of the key members from the Detroit People's Food Co-op, including our board president, Lene Gilbert-Williams, and the head of our store operations committee, Ujamaa Tata, and several other key folks went to Gem City Market in Dayton to learn from them. And the photo at the top is some of the folks who attended from Detroit. And the photo at the bottom is Ujamaa Tata, our store operations committee head, learning from our good brother, Amaha Selassie, who is the board chair of the Gem City Market. Also, last Saturday, we had an event. We are struggling we're still in a pandemic to come up with ways to keep our member owners involved and engaging with each other. So we had a game night at a local community organization, which was primarily for member owners. We had a few new folks come out, but it was primarily to connect member owners with each other. And so again, we have our board president, Lene Gilbert-Williams, on the left, and that's part of her crew. So don't mess with Lene because she got a crew. We invite you to join us next summer. We expect to open next August. And I think we might have about 6 minutes left for Q&A. If you want to get in touch with me, that is my contact information. Let's open it up for Q&A.
got a few things in the chat. If we go back a bit, too.
Thank you. So maybe maybe you can read what's in the chat.
I would love to. Okay, so I want to go back to Karen. Karen, it's more of a statement, but I think it's really important. It makes sense to locate where you can get the traffic passing by, traveling to other areas. My hope is that we can use the traffic from the University of Chicago, which is the largest employer on the South Side, but located in an underserved area. So she was just reflecting back that they're trying a similar model on the South Side in Chicago.
Hey, Karen, hope you're doing well. Look forward to talking to you soon, catching
up. Question, are you receiving any major donations from organizations like health systems or businesses? And if so, are they going to be offered any specific types of acknowledgement?
So we've gotten about $5 million in funding from local foundations. And that's a longer story, again, that I won't get into now, but it's related to the pandemic, it's related to George Floyd, and it's related to a shift that has taken place in philanthropy. But we have not been successful in getting health systems to buy into it. We have approached a couple and had discussions, but thus far it has not resulted in anything concrete. And the same with businesses. We've had donations from individuals, but we haven't had so much support from the business and corporate community.
And I think it's interesting, if you were at our session last night, Kenya spoke to some of the drawbacks of getting those kinds of support. So make sure you watch the video from that one. Garnell, and if you want to mute, it's okay. He said, what are some of the challenges you ran into supporting women and Black-led project development team leaders?
Well, of course, patriarchy is part of the overall society. And so, I can say for sure, I'm one who's struggling with that. And, I'm much better now than I was 30 years ago when I started struggling with it, but it will be a lifetime work. And certainly racism and healing from the impact of racism is a lifetime work as well. So those are constants, as we're building the diminished views sometimes that we have of women leadership. Can stand in the way. And sometimes people, I've noticed some folks, they want to come to me with the issue. I'm like, you need to go to the board president. I'm not the board president, but because people are so used to men being in charge of every damn thing. And, that's a constant thing.
Well, I'm sorry. I guess maybe one story or example might help to. I know I agree. I understand the general challenges, but I'm just curious about one story or particular example. From your situation.
I'm not sure if right off the top I can come up with a specific story, but I'll just say that there's a general tendency that I've seen of people wanting to bypass the board president and come to me because they feel like I'm one of the people who started, but I'm not in charge. It's a collective thing. I have one vote like everybody else. We have our board president, Lene, on. I don't know if you want to add to this discussion. Is there a specific example that you want to share?
Not in particular, but Bobby is correct. And I'm not sure if it's what I've experienced is specifically because I am a woman and board president, or if it's because Baba Malik has been championing the co-op for so long, but I'm sure that it definitely happens.
Thank you. But we are intentionally, of course, promoting women leadership. We are intentionally promoting Black leadership.
Yes, that's so. Also, sorry to add really quickly, Baba. That is, I think that the role that you in particular play in consistently reminding everyone that the co-op's creation is the result of a lot of people's efforts. A community that has come together, a village that has come together. One thing that he does, one thing that Baba Malik does on a regular basis is no matter what crowd he's in front of, he's going to always highlight those who have been involved in the project. And he's not just mentioning the men who are involved in a project, the women who are involved in a project as well, and what great roles they play, and acknowledges that So many of us stand on the shoulders of those who put in a lot of work from the beginning and even in other projects. So it doesn't even have a feel of this is a male-dominated project at all. It has the village feel. It has the community feel to it.
Thank you. And I'll end, we need to end and turn it back over to JQ. I'll end by just saying that you can't give people a co-op, and that it is the result of the development of a collective consciousness and then collective action that is derived from that collective consciousness. And there's really no getting around that. There's no getting around doing the grunt work in the community to build the support that is necessary to build and develop a co-op. Thank you.
Let's take a moment. I'm so grateful to Malik for being here and giving us his time. He does not usually have time to do this, and it just means a lot to us that he's here. Thank you so, so much. I do want to take just a second and share about what's coming up to make sure everyone does know. We will have the recording, of course, of Malik's session that you will be able to hand out, follow up, send out to other folks, as well as don't miss Kenya Akbar's session from yesterday, which touches on some similar but slightly different issues about organizing in Black Lake community. She was a big part of the Gem City Market, one of the foremost organizers. But we have coming up big this afternoon, Main Street Market. This is very much oriented toward the needs of rural co-ops. If you were on a rural, and I don't mean USDA rural, I mean rural as in not 25,000, 2,000, people type communities. They have developed a model that really seems to be working to get grocery stores into these really small markets that are community owned. They are independently owned, but they're coming to share their wisdom with us about how they did this. And then we'll have something more technical for those of you who are doing the outreach work, ordering and offering co-op t-shirts. This is something that's really important to getting your brand out there. Kenya talked about this last night, and it's actually more complicated than it seems. Jerry Nash from Prairie Food Club has really worked out the details, and he'll be here to share this with you so you can easily do the same thing. And then Thursday, we'll go to the silent phase of fundraising. If your co-op is raising money directly from your owners and community as individuals, this is aimed at you. So not all co-ops are doing that, but if you are, this is a great session for you. Real quick, we do need to thank those who make this series possible. Thanks to the USDA, National Cooperative Bank, National Cooperative Grocers, and CoBank. But most of all, thanks to Malik. Yeah, that's, I don't know if Malik, if you need to go right away or if you have an extra couple of minutes to talk to folks.